Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1986 comedy film Armed and Dangerous. Now, Armed and Dangerous to me personally is one of John Candy's more overlooked films in his filmography. It's not one of my favorites of his, but it's still a fun movie to watch, and I do feel it has one of John's best performances in it. And I think it's definitely a lot better than its reputation might suggest. I mean, the movie didn't do that well financially when it came out, and critics really were not very fond of it either. And I think it's not really as bad as people made it out to be, and I do feel that it deserves a little more recognition. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on Armed and Dangerous, I would like to give a special shout out to Greg for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. A link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, Armed and Dangerous is directed by Mark L. Lester, who, in my opinion, has directed a lot of genuinely good, if not great, movies. I mean, he did Commando in 1985 before this, he did Firestarter, he did Class of 1984, he did Showdown in Little Tokyo. Um, I think he's a very capable director. Now, he's not really a comedy guy, though. And Mark has even admitted that this was his first comedy and he was kind of in the weeds with this film. And I definitely feel there are some moments where you can kind of definitely tell, to the point where I feel that maybe a better, more established veteran comedy director really might have been a better fit for this movie. But Mark is also a big reason why the action in this is surprisingly good for a comedy. So you would lose that aspect of the film, which I think is definitely a highlight. So it's one of those things where I think it would have been interesting to have seen a different director with more of a comedy uh bent, more comedy experience. But I still feel that Marco Lester, for the most part, he did an all right job. I don't think he did a bad job directing this. There were some moments where, yeah, the slapstick wasn't as funny as it could have been with a more established and accomplished comedy director. There are some moments with some of the dialogue or some of the other sort of scenes that were trying to be a little bit more zany or slapsticky or having some pratfalls that didn't didn't really deliver as many laughs as I think they could have with somebody else uh, directing it. But I feel that he started to hit his stride after a certain point, and I felt that he did find his footing, and I feel that he got a lot of solid performances out of an amazing cast. And I think for a comedy, it's not really something that takes a ton of risks when it comes to camera angles, but there are some moments where I feel that he definitely goes uh, into a direction that you wouldn't necessarily expect sometimes for a comedy movie in terms of the angles that he's using with the camera or the pans or the zooms or the other camera techniques. But he is admittedly at his best when it comes to the car crashes, the bazooka explosions, and all of the other chaos that happens in the finale of the film. And that just is honestly due to his experience as an action director. But it was interesting to see him try something new, to try to do something that's a little bit out of his comfort zone. And I think he still managed to stay afloat, managed to do at least an adequate job. So I don't think Marco Lester did a particularly bad job directing this. Even though he might have been a bad fit, he still made it work. Now, the film is written by Brian Grazer, James Keach, Harold Ramis, and an uncredited Peter or PJ Torka Kavai, Toro Kavai. And this was originally a project that was written for Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, but John Belushi passed away, so uh, the original version of this movie that Harold Ramis had written ultimately did not happen. And what's crazy about that version is that John Carpenter was attached to direct it, but there were some disagreements between Aykroyd and Carpenter, and so Carpenter fell. He fell out of the project. He decided to withdraw his involvement in it, and then it was stuck in development hell for many many years after Belushi's death, and then Ramis was approached by Brian Grazer, the producer, and he asked Ramis for permission to use the script and make it into a movie. He's like, "Hey, if I could find a director, can I make this movie?" And Harold was like, "Sure." And he found a director, Mark L. Lester, and then got a cast, which originally was going to have Tom Hanks in the role that Eugene Levy played, but Tom eventually dropped out. And of course, John Candy, who played the lead in the film, and Frank Dooley. And I know Ramis he's basically disowned this movie. He said that, oh, it didn't turn out at all the way that I'd hoped. I tried to get my name off of it, but I couldn't. I don't think it's that bad of a script. I really don't. I think the script is fine. It's not fantastic, but I think a lot of the really great jokes, if it was going to be a Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi vehicle, it would have been improvised anyway. It wouldn't have been in the script. And I think the script as it is, it's definitely something that I feel has some good pieces. So I like the fact that Dooley is shown to be a kind-hearted, good-natured, good cop early on. He's not a bumbling buffoon. Except, you do have the bit where he got freaked out and he was stuck on top of the tree trying to save that cat. But it shows that when he lost his job as a cop, it wasn't because he was just incompetent or anything. He wasn't good enough. He was framed. And I think that definitely does make for a lot of sympathy for Dooley when he was framed by Rizzo and Nedler and dismissed from the force. And I think the stuff involving Dooley is written well in terms of how he wound up becoming a security guard and how he ultimately makes it work and then uses his involvement with guard dog security to crack open another case and save his career as a police officer. Those are elements of the script that are written well. Now, when it comes to his partner, Norman Kane, I don't really feel it did as good of a job setting himself up to become a security guard. He's an attorney. He is usually defending these psychotic or just genuinely deplorable criminals. And one of the criminals he's defending threatens to kill him. He freaks out. He's trying to get a mistrial, but the judge just basically sentences this prisoner to a life sentence, and then tells Norman to leave the business of being a lawyer because he just can't handle it. And I think there should have been a little bit more with Norman, like have him like trying to find other jobs. maybe have him trying to be a different sort of attorney, like an accident attorney, and then it just goes completely awry and it doesn't work. It tries to get another, maybe tries to get a job as a private investigator or something, and he's terrible, or just something that shows him winding up at guard dog security in a way that makes more sense than him just going from a defense attorney to security guard. Like, it just didn't really feel like that was a believable turn for his character. And also, I would have liked to have seen more scenes with Dooley and Kane training, getting to know each other more, because they ultimately do become quite a formidable and fun pair. But there's not a lot of them working together or doing a lot of fun stuff together for a good chunk of the movie until they eventually decide to go on their own and start investigating what's going on with all these robberies and involvement with Carlino and the security company. But even though there's not a lot of moments with them early on when they're training, there's still some really funny and fun bits when it comes to the training sequence or series of sequences when they're training to become security guards. I really love the scene where they are introduced to the union, and you've got, I mean, this cast is just incredible. So you've got Jonathan Banks as Klepper. You've got Brion James, who is Lazarus. And I think there's this other guy. I don't remember exactly what his name was. They're trying to get everybody to sign their forms for the union. And Norman is causing a ruckus because he's like, hey, what? Why do I have to pay you $30 now out of my paycheck and then $15 for a union? Why do I have to do that if I don't want to do it? And then I love this quote. I really think it's genuinely hilarious. It cracks me up every time. Hey, what's with all the questions? This is your union. It's for your own protection. So shut up and sign the fucking form. And then Eugene Levy is just like, Norman just like, okay. So that was a funny moment. And there's even another funny moment where they're testing out the firearms, and Norman just misses everything. He misses the entire target by a mile. And then this thing pops up in the shooting range. It's like, you got killed by the perpetrator. I like a lot of that. There's definitely a lot of Police Academy vibes when it comes to that stuff. And I wanted to see more of that, to be honest. I wanted to see more of the training. It felt like that was a very small part of the movie, and I don't feel that should have been a little bit more. And that was a bit of a letdown because, like, oh, this is fun. It's like Police Academy, but with armed security, with security guards, and then it just is there. It's just a sequence that's honestly on screen for maybe like 5 minutes. And that leads to Dooley and Kane. They wind up getting partnered up, and they have their first shift, and something goes bad. Kane witnesses a robbery. Then it leads to a shootout. Leads to Kane hiding in this room that's full of these dogs. And I really like the scene where Dooley holds his own against all these dogs, and they're attacking him, and he's like biting the dog and throwing the dogs off. And that's one scene out of many that I really liked, that really established Dooley as a guy who could actually get things done, who could actually, kick a little ass, and hold his own, and wasn't just a fat bumbling fool. Like, that was really nice to see, and it was really nice to see John Candy be able to play a character like that. Like that whole scene at the bar when he punches out the two corrupt cops who framed him. Uh, and of course the stuff at in the climax with the motorcycle and the big 50 caliber pistol. Now, because they witnessed this crime happening, now they're trying to figure out who's behind it. They they wind up telling their boss about it, and he just fines them all of his money and basically doesn't believe them, and is like, "Don't screw up again, or I'll fire you." Their boss O'Connell. And so they decide to go to this union meeting, and it's Norman's idea to start chiming up and talking about the fees, the fines for not doing anything wrong, and talking about how the money that they're paying to the union and asking where it's going to. And it causes this really intense maybe isn't the right word, but it gets very heated between, the union reps and Norman, and now he's got a target on his back, and now him and Dooley, they wind up getting sent to these really crappy security posts. They get sent to a garbage dump. They get sent to a toxic waste dump. And that's when they find out that these two guys that were there at the toxic waste dump, they witnessed a robbery too and talked about it to their superior, and then it got sent to this toxic waste dump. And so it's something that's now a cycle. And so they decide to leave the dump and leave their post and start investigating Carlino and his involvement with guard dog security. And they go undercover, and they wind up getting information from one of the guard dog security guys who is like a heavy for Carlino and his gang, played by Tiny Lister, by Tommy Tiny Lister, Bruno. And they get information out of him at this health club in a fun scene. And you have other moments where Dooley, he's getting information from an old informant of his and Cappy, and that leads to honestly one of my favorite scenes in the movie when he's fishing. Dooley's fishing, and he gets a shark, and then he winds up shooting the shark full of lead, and and that's how he winds up getting the shark. Like he poses for a picture with the shark on the fishing reel, on the fishing hook, and he's holding his pistol and he's doing all different moves with it. Like that really cracked me up. And there's a love story that's going on too between Norman and Maggie, but that really wasn't as well established as it could be, because it just basically is brought up out of nowhere when Norman and Frank, they go to her house to try to tell her about the stuff, the details that they've gotten from Cappy, um, about Carlino, and also from Bruno, and how her father is potentially involved in it, and she's hurt by it, and then is saying something about Norman and how she likes him, and it just kind of came out of nowhere. Then there's like a fun bar scene with the two, with Frank and Norman. They have these two dates that are, I mean, they're bimbos. That's really what they're intended to be. They're blonde bimbos. And they take these bimbos to this party that Carlino is having at his mansion, and they sneak in, and, and that leads to another like really funny moment in my opinion, where Noreen is talking to these other guests at the party, and she's talking about being formal, and she's like, "Gosh, I didn't realize it was going to be this formal. If I had known it was going to be this kind of party, I would have worn underwear." And then like people are appalled and getting upset, and just the way that that line was said cracked me up. And then you have the scene in the sauna where Frank and Norman hide in the sauna to hear a conversation between Carlino and his men, and that's when they find out that Carlino was planning on taking out Brackman, who is the treasurer of the union, and they try to save him, but he winds up getting shot during a shootout. And then Frank and Norman wind up on the run, driving away from Lazarus and Klepper. And now they know what the plan is, though. That Carlino is going to convert the union's benefit fund into $11 million in cash, and then use it to make some deal in South America. And so this is when Maggie winds up joining Frank and Norman, and she becomes a part of the plan. Of course, prior to all of that, Frank and Norman get away from the cops by putting on a disguise, where Frank winds up dressing in drag, and Norman winds up dressing like a gay prostitute, like a gay guy, who's into S&M with assless chaps. After that is when they wind up getting Maggie on their side. Maggie winds up joining Norman in the armored car, and Norman and Maggie are being chased by Lazarus and Klepper, as well as the corrupt cops and a bunch of other people on Carlino's payroll. Frank is trying to get to Norman and Maggie in time, but he runs into some obstacles. His bike won't start. His bike eventually does start, but then it breaks down in the middle of traffic on a bridge. And he decides to go out and run on foot, but then he realizes that's not going to work. So then he tries to do all these different things and try to get a ride from people, and he's just not able to. He tries to get a ride from a woman. She rolls the window up and hurts his hands. He tries to go and ask people in a big monster truck for a ride, and they just spray him with beer. And I love the bit where he winds up just getting a sly smile on his face, and then takes out a switchblade and punctures one of their tires. And then he finally settles upon this trucker and named the Cowboy. And that's another moment in the film that I really enjoy. In fact, I would have liked to have seen more of this cowboy trucker, because the dynamic between John and Steve Railsback is really strong, and they're a lot of fun together. And so that's where you get lines like, "Slim, I ain't never seen a handgun that big before." "Yeah, it's a 50 caliber. They use it to hunt buffalo with. Up close. It's only legal in 2 states, and this isn't one of them." So that was definitely one of my favorite lines in the movie, to be honest. And it was just fun to see John Candy, with a 50 caliber pistol. It's a cool looking gun too. And then there's just a lot of car crashes because the cowboy decides to just drive through the traffic. And there's even more car crashes after that. There's even a scene where the cowboy's truck gets blown up with a rocket launcher, which when I first saw this, I was really surprised by that. I was not expecting some guy to pop out of an ice cream truck with a bazooka and blow up a truck and a tanker carrying rocket fuel in a comedy starring John Candy and Eugene Levy. So that was fun. And ultimately, Frank and Norman and Maggie and reformed Captain O'Connell, they stopped the bad guys. They stopped Carlino. They stopped the corrupt cops. They stopped Lazarus and Klepper. And Frank winds up getting his job back at the precinct. and he ropes Norman into joining him as a cop, and that's the end of the film. That's the end of the story. Yeah, I could see why some people are like, "Oh, this is cliche. This is predictable." Kind of been there, done that kind of stuff when it comes to the plot, but it was still for the most part engaging enough because I wanted to see the bad guys go down because they're written in a way that makes them genuinely despicable, but in a way that you love to hate. And I was rooting for Frank and Norman to redeem themselves, especially Frank. And yeah, the love story of Norman and Maggie isn't really that well done, and it could have been handled a lot better. The comedy at points, it's not as clever or as witty as it could be. There's a lot of stuff where the gags just kind of are like or aren't really that funny. But there's enough moments though that do make you chuckle or make you smirk, and there's like a handful of laugh out loud moments. But I do have to admit it could have been a bit better in terms of the overall screenplay. Now the cast is honestly one of the best things about the movie. This cast is amazing. For a comedy movie, this cast is honestly arguably one of the best casts you could ever possibly ask for. It's loaded with talent. It's loaded with really good actors and really talented and strong character actors. Um, you got John Candy, who's just as amicable, just as amazing, just as charming, just as funny as ever as Frank Dooley. You got Eugene Levy, his SCTV co-star, is Norman Kane, and he's still good, but I think he's definitely not as good as John. But I think a lot of that is due to what he was given to work with when it comes to the script. When he's given funny lines to say, and when he's given comedic things to do, he's actually rather funny. But there's a lot of stuff that's very dry, and he's not really given a lot to do. So it's not entirely Eugene Levy's fault that some of his scenes kind of fall a little flat. Robert Loggia as Carlino, he's just as smarmy as ever. Um, Kenneth McMillan as Captain O'Connell was a decent performance by him. Meg Ryan, I wouldn't say it's one of her strongest performances, but she was cute, and she definitely was a good addition to the cast. Brion James and Jonathan Banks were great heavies, great bad guys. Um, Don Shroud was good as Sergeant Rizzo. Larry Hankin is Kokolovich. Steve Railsback stole every scene that he was in as the cowboy. Tony Burton, it was nice to see him work alongside John Candy as Cappy. Um, you also have, Larry Jenkins as Raisin, Tommy Tiny Lister as Bruno, James Tolkan, Principal Strickland from Back to the Future as Brackman. Just an incredible cast of just really talented actors. The cinematography, it's fine. It's okay for a comedy. Um, it's not anything to write home about. It's not anything that substantial or that great, but it's decent for what it is. I feel the same way about the editing by Daniel P. Hanley, Mike Hill, and Gregory Prange. The music by Bill Myers, though, I didn't care for. I really liked the song Armed and Dangerous by Atlantic Star, but I didn't really care for the score. The score was very silly and in a way that was kind of obnoxious, and it honestly made a lot of the scenes that it was in sound a little too cartoonish for my tastes. I know it's kind of a silly, fun romp movie, but the score was just a little too silly. I still enjoyed it. I liked it. I would love to see this get a re-release because it's out of print and it goes for like over $50 on Amazon. The transfer is actually surprisingly good, but it's bare bones. So I'd like to see a release that has something in terms of features. And also so people who are fans of John, they can actually afford to get this on Blu-ray because as it is right now, you're gonna have to steal money from an armored car to afford this film on Blu-ray. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on Armed and Dangerous. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.